Hi, this is Justin Colletti of Sonic Scoop. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Sonic Scoop podcast. Super psyched to have a guest who is not only a tremendous producer, engineer, and artist in his own right, but has been an excellent contributor for Sonic Scoop. Honestly, I think some of the best written articles and some of the most concise and pithy articles on the site are from this guy. His name, Paul Willie Green Womack. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
All right. Just to give you a little bit more background, Paul has worked in a lot of genres. I'd say he does a lot. I think of him first and foremost as working on a lot of hip hop, but that's not all he's done. He's worked with pretty big gospel artists, Donnie McClurkin. He's worked with Wiz Khalifa, Lucid, Billy Wood, Open Mike Eagle, a whole lot of major and indie hip hop artists and artists in other genres. And the topic we're going to be on today is something that really applies no matter what genre you're in. And that is how to wear multiple hats in the studio, right? When are you producing? When are you engineering? How do you shift back and forth between those two hats? And what are all of the roles that go into making great records? And how do you make sure that A, those jobs get done, and B, whether you should be the one doing them or if you should be outsourcing them? And we're going to look into some strategies for kind of all of those things. Right before we dive into it, I do have to do, here's your 90 seconds of bliss, our sponsor shout outs. Right now, I have this mysterious logo on my shirt. It is the logo for a company none other than Novation, who make killer MIDI controllers, drum machine pad controllers, really affordable, excellent synths like the Bass Station. Really cool stuff from Novation. If you need good MIDI control in your studio, killer option that has really affordable, really well-built options. Another sponsor this time is Sound Toys. Thank you again to Sound Toys for sponsoring. Make some of my favorite plugins. I'm pretty sure Paul Willie Green Womack uses Sound Toys plugins as well.
Love them.
And last, certainly not least, sponsoring this podcast is Gear Club, another podcast. Let Gear Club be your other stop for some of the best and most interesting conversations around music production and audio. Check them out, gear-club.net, or type in Gear Club wherever you get this or other podcasts. With all that out of the way, Paul, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Good stuff, man. So let's cover this ground first. What do you see as being the difference between being a producer and an engineer? Are you often wearing both those hats on records? And how are those two roles different to you? Just let's get that out of the way first.
Yeah, I find more and more myself and other music professionals, I feel like we need a new word for it because we are doing all of these different roles, but definitely production and engineering, I find nowadays overlap a lot. And especially in the hip hop world where traditional record production is, you deal with the band and you're guiding the musicians to get what you want out of them. Where in hip hop production, you're making the track. But some people kind of stop short there. It's like, I made the beat, I produced it. Well, someone needs to guide the artist. Someone needs to let them know, hey, you rushed a little bit on this bar. Let's redo the end piece or whatever it is. And that's often the engineer in a lot of these cases, but that's production. That's vocal production. So where is the line there between them? Is there a line? Should your tracking engineer be getting production credit because they're actually doing, like, how does all this work? And it's a conversation I find myself having a lot.
Right. So this is another good question right off the bat, that the word producer is used sometimes differently in hip hop than it is in other idioms. Like you said, there are people who call themselves producers who are just beat maker is a better term. And then there are people who are producers who are doing a lot more than just making beats. Do you think that this is still a point of confusion in hip hop, or do you think more and more people working at a high level have a distinction between what is beat making and what is producing, and when you're crossing that line?
I feel like the term itself is definitely blurred, and part of that, as people's studios move smaller and smaller, either into homes or like a one-person operation like mine is here at the greenhouse, you wind up doing a bit of both. If I make a beat for somebody, they know that I also engineer, record vocals. Chances are they're going to come to me. So it's the production process extends beyond just drums and samples and synths. It involves dealing with the artist. I feel like beat maker is a good term for someone who, if you just make beats and that's what you do, and you send them to someone, and maybe you send your client and the beats over to me, and I engineer it and I take it from there. That's kind of a different thing, but if you're just making the beat and sending it off somewhere, I feel like that's an appropriate title for it.
Right. So it sounds like in the work that you do, you could be doing at least three roles: the role of engineer, the role of vocal producer and the role of the original beat maker on the track. So
Right.
how do you juggle those roles and keep your head on straight? Do they kind of blend together? And if blending together is a problem, do you try to separate them? How do you go about it?
I've tried to separate them for a long time. I went to music school. I went to Berkeley and did their great program there. And at least when I was there many moons ago, it was things were definitely separated into producer, engineer, and even tracking engineer, mixing engineer, mastering engineer. And these are all full-time jobs that one individual might do. And now on any given project, odds are I'm doing all of them. And so there's just that. Because of my upbringing, I always kind of tried to separate them. But now as I go, I find myself kind of blending them more and more. If I might I'll produce the track, but then once we cut the vocal, I may want to tweak the arrangement, make things, serve the melodies, serve the verses or whatever. And so I'm still doing production and arranging throughout the whole process. I find mixing very much part of the arranging process, because the more you turn up this thing or turn this thing down, your song is changing, your arrangement feels different. So I find myself nowadays really kind of combining all of them together. If I produce a song from the beginning, as I'm doing rough mixes, as I'm doing different revisions, I'm kind of always mixing along the way. And then when it's time to sit down and do the final mix, I'm kind of halfway there because my clients and I have been living with it in that certain way all along.
Gotcha. Now, are you saying that you originally tried things out in this more strict, like we have to be done with all of our edits and the beat before we get to the vocal, and when we're not going back? Did you try that stricter approach and found out it didn't work for you? What kind of obstacles were you running into?
I definitely tried to compartmentalize things because that's just how my mind worked at first. But, if we're into the mixing stage, but we're like, oh well, this vocal, we've got to tune this, we've got to edit as things arise. And I kind of just let the song kind of guide me to where I'm going, where, all right, well, we've got to go back and we need to edit this verse a little bit, or man, this, the hook sounds great, but we can, if we edit this or if we tune that, the song kind of, as it grows, it reveals more things that I need to adjust. If I make a beat and just send it to someone, I'm expecting to have to do some tweaks once they write to it and things change. If I'm in the room writing with an artist, then that's different because I'm crafting what I'm making along with what they're making at the same time. Right. So there might be less things that happen from an arrangement standpoint later on. But, someone will have an idea at 2 a.m. and say, hey, Green, I want to try this tomorrow. And I'm like, well, all right, we mixed that last week, but I guess we're back into it. Right. I think that client expectations have changed what we do as audio professionals a lot, because most artists know at least basics of how DAWs work and how plugins work. So they bring a lot more ideas to the table. Elucid, one of the artists I work with, he does a lot of, edits and special effects even during his creation process. And we're working on a project, whether it's my beat or his or someone else's. Someone will come in and we'll record the vocals, and I'll send them to Elucid, and he'll do his effects and his edits on it and send them back, and I might pick up the ball from there. So the collaboration process has definitely changed because artists themselves do so much of it on their own.
Yeah. The fluency that artists have with at least the basics, sometimes more than the basics of audio production, is so much higher now than it would have been, a half a generation ago. So when you're collaborating with an artist like that, and you're kind of the beat maker and they're bringing you in to produce the track and not just produce their vocal, what's the collaboration like? Do you do a lot of this collaboration from afar? Are you doing collaboration in the room with the artist? And in both or either of those cases, can you kind of tell us what approaches have worked best for you?
For a long time, I was the kind of producer where I would just like to sit in a room by myself and make beats, and I would make 5, 6, 7 beats a day. And then if I wanted to send somebody something, I would sit down and imagine how they would sound on a certain beat, and I would send them a folder. And the secret with rappers is they will always pick the beat that you didn't expect them to pick.
Yeah.
Which is, a happy surprise. So I'll put, a few in there that I'm like, okay, I know this is what I would pick for them, and then I might throw in a few joints that are kind of left field, just because who knows what kind of mood they'll be in, who knows what they'll pick, and a lot of times it's some of those ones that we didn't expect. But that's exciting because then for me as a creator, it's like, okay, well, we're gonna change direction here, and that just opens up new challenges. But I've been doing more and more writing with the artist in the room, or at least with the artist in mind. I've been lucky enough that the studio has stayed busy enough. I don't have time to just sit around and make beats all day like I used to before. So if somebody wants me to make a beat for them to sing or rap over or whatever, I'm doing it with them specifically in mind. I'm probably writing something for them. So I might not send them as many selections because I'm not just going through a folder, but what I do send is more custom made for them.
Right. So what's the conversation like right off the top of the bat where, say, if someone isn't going to be in the room with you, but they want to kind
Mhm.
of commission something and you're kind of creating something specifically for them, like they're commissioning you to do this work. What's that conversation like? What do you need to know to be able to start making a track? And are references useful for you in this, or are references something that can be problematic because you don't want to end up copying things, or are they a useful guideline?
Uh, the reference thing is interesting. It very much depends on what the reference is that the client says and how closely. If someone is like, "Hey, I want a record just like Frank Ocean,"
Hmm.
well, okay, cool, but that goes to a larger conversation of, well, what do you like about what Frank Ocean does? Are you an artist similar to Frank Ocean, or do you just like how Channel Orange sounds? It's not, and so now you want to make that. That to me that never works out as people intend. Like, I want to sound just like I want to beat just like Just Blaze on this. If it's something like that, I kind of feel like, well, if you want a Just Blaze beat, you should call Just Blaze, because as talented and brilliant as I find him, that's not what I sound like.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm lucky enough that I have kind of established my own sound. So if someone is calling me, ideally they're calling me for what I make.
Yeah.
But the first conversation is always, well, tell me about the project. Is this a single? Is this for an album? What's the scope of the album? What do you want to write about? What do you want to talk about? That goes a long way. If they're in kind of a melancholy state, but I'm sending them like club bangers,
Hmm.
it doesn't work, and we're never going to find the right match for it. If it's an artist who I don't know and haven't worked with before, I want to get to know them a bit. I'm very artsy fartsy about it, but if we're making art, I want to understand the person I'm creating art with, because if we don't have that connection, I find that translates through the speakers as much as an EQ or a compression does, that we just are not on the same page. I want to know about that person.
Right, right. Now, would you say you're doing this more often, remote collaboration, or more often with an artist right in the room with you? Is there one that you do more often, and is there one that you prefer?
Within the past year, it's definitely been more often with a person in the room.
Hmm.
I find that I get better results with that. The antisocial part of me likes to kind of sit by myself in a room, and part of that so I can sit there and make mistakes.
Hmm.
For every great beat that somebody makes, there's probably three or four bad ones in a hard drive somewhere.
Yeah.
But there's something about when the client's in the room and the pressure's on, and all right, we're gonna make a record today, and you got to show up and create something challenging and interesting. There's pressure to that, but that's kind of the fun part of being in the room with the musician. But you feed off of their energy,
Hmm.
and also just from a logistical standpoint, if I'm in the room with someone and they're like, "That's dope," I know I'm headed in the right direction. Or if it's bad, they'll let me know early on, like, "Hey, this isn't the vibe I'm looking for," and I can switch lanes. I'm not going back and remaking a bunch of stuff because I'm guessing what they like.
Right, right. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Now, what kind of advice could you give to artists who are going to be in the situation, who are going to be, they're not the primary producer or beat maker on the track. They're looking for something that they're going to drop vocals over. How can they best approach working with that person who's doing it? If they're going to be in the room with you, what they should they know in advance to get the most out of you while also not getting in your way and not getting in their own way?
So many artists have different writing styles and different ways of working. And when someone comes in to write with me, I want them to be comfortable in that way. I always look at it, the artist, their name is in big letters on the front of whatever release it is, and my name is, ideally, somewhere inside, properly credited,
Yeah.
but somewhere in small letters in there. So I really try to, as a producer, be flexible. And as an engineer, if I'm cutting vocals, I ask, well, how do you prefer to record? Sections at a time or all the way through? But I like to get to know what their writing process is and try to work with them from that way. But I do think it's important that an artist comes in with some kind of plan in mind instead of, all right, well, yeah, we'll just come in and just see what happens. All right, cool. But then if we're in the studio all day just noodling, with some people, that can be fun. But I need to also just keep in mind, all right, I'm running a business here. If we're in the studio just, messing around or whatever, what are we working toward? Just for me as a professional, that makes it a lot easier to have a goal and work towards a thing instead of messing around.
Right. So what are the first things that you are throwing down to establish the vibe so you can know quickly whether you're headed in the right direction? Is it starting with rhythm tracks? Is it starting with a melodic hook? What are the things that you find the most effective to start with to solidify the vibe to say, hey, this is either the right way to go or not?
If it's a rap session, if it's a hip hop session, I'm probably going to start with drums. I'm a drummer. I've been a drummer my whole life. So that's the easiest thing for me to start with. And then you're establishing tempo, you're establishing kind of the vibe of the song, because you change a kick drum, all of a sudden you got a different song. Yeah. So if I start there and if I'm starting something up tempo and like, yeah, now I'm feeling something a little smoother today, then I can pivot, just from that standpoint. If I'm working with a singer, then I might start with something more melodic with more harmonic content, so they can start writing more quickly. If I've got drums and the drums are going, if I got, for a hip hop thing, if I got drums and a sample or drums and, a basic synth line or whatever, they can start writing right away because the basic elements of the rhythm are there. But I find for singers, I want to get them going quicker and be able to imagine melodies. So I want to do something, I might start with keys versus drums on that.
In this context, are you finding that artists are most often writing lyrics, writing melody to what you've created, or are they bringing that stuff in and then you're trying to shape something around that structure?
I would say nowadays it's 50-50. I get a lot of just like voice memos from people. Yeah. I've got a singer I'm working with now named Danielle Cardona, and we talked about doing a record, and she said, oh, well, I just had this idea, for a song. It's a verse and a chorus. I just kind of sang it in my phone. She sent it to me, and I just dropped that into Cubase and made a track based around that. Nice. And sent it to her, and then we tweaked a couple things, but just based off of just her singing to her cell phone for 30 seconds on the street, I was able to kind of find the vibe the vibe that we talked about and her general intent and build from there. Yeah. But if somebody comes in, if an artist comes in with an idea, that's the first thing that I'm going to tune into is what they brought to the table, because it's really not about me putting my intent and my sound on a song. It's about creating the right song for that artist.
Right. Yeah. I remember early in my career, I used to do a lot of hip hop sessions and engineering, really, not producing, not making beats. But every once in a while, they did find out that I played instruments. I played guitar, I played bass, I played drums. And they'd say, hey, could you play something on this track? And I'd always be a little embarrassed because I'm not super virtuosic, and I've always played in, rock bands where I'm kind of figuring out parts in advance and then to do something on the fly. But it would be the simplicity that they'd want out of me, like 3 or 4 notes. And they'd be like, no, don't do more stuff. Do that. Keep on doing it. Change this one note. And it was a great process just to play the same bit again and again, and then just change one note placement until the feel was right, and then go into a loop of that. And I always thought that was interesting. There is almost like a jazz improvisation aspect to it where you're collaborating in real time with others. But there's also this funk aspect where it's like, don't go around all over the neck of your instrument. Don't go doing a million things. Find the thing that's going to work, and let's find what that thing is that's going to work. And I thought that was really interesting. And then another situation I've been in a bunch, and maybe this is a situation you've been in, is working with like top line writers who will get a track, pre-made, and you're working on a vocal session where they're essentially taking a track and trying to turn it into a song. And being an engineer in a session where someone is trying to write a hook over a beat and be there for them so that they can explore that and see all the different ways the track can go. It's really interesting and a totally different paradigm for a lot of people who might be used to more like the rock idiom, more like the gospel idiom, where you're kind of doing a pre-production stage, you know what the songs are and you bring them in. It's just a totally different way of making music, and it comes out in the final product, I think.
Right, right. Yeah, it's interesting, engineering songwriting sessions like that. It's a bit of a different skill set because you've got to be prepared for any direction. I guess, that goes for tracking in general, but, someone or a group of people may be sitting there and collaborating and working on a hook. And when they have it, you need to be on and you need to be ready. And these are, these are the skills. And I always tell my assistants and interns, it's like, sessions like that, as the tracking engineer, you're the one in the room that cannot slow down the session.
Right.
If the songwriter is having, needs to take their time writing the hook, if the vocalist needs to take their time, locking it in and getting the performance, that's fine. But as the engineer, you need to be ready to be flexible and record and get a great vocal every single time. And people want speed and they want accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of hurry up and wait. You set up, everything's ready, then you sit and play the beat probably louder than you like while a bunch of people write to it. And then all of a sudden, any split second, you're on and you need to capture the right take of the right part, and whether you need to then fly it to the next chorus or whatever. There's a lot of attention to detail in between long periods of sitting around.
Yeah.
So it can be a challenging type of gig.
Man, for those people who have not been in on hip hop writing sessions, I almost want to recommend to bring earplugs for how long and how loud you're going to be hearing those tracks. And I've seen guys get up in front of, the big Augsburger monitors, mounted in the wall, cranking out like 100 dB and putting like their ear right up to it, and it's like, man, wow.
I can't imagine it.
How long are you expect to be in this field if you're doing that?
Right.
To your
do you want to
ears?
make this one song or do you want to make more after this? Because you might not have the opportunity. Swizz Beatz was always notorious for that, where he would dime out the monitor volume on the SSL, but he would also put in the bus compressor and push the gain all the way up. And it's just like, are you hearing anything at that volume, or you just? I mean, I guess you're getting the feeling. And look, Swizz Beatz is certainly successful, so can't argue with them. But
it depends.
That's a lot for me.
It depends on what the end format that your thing is going to be heard in, because if you're making stuff that's specifically for clubs, and I've done live sound in clubs, and it is about, people are not dancing to like the little top end flourishes you've put on. I mean, those are cool, but they're dancing to the physical feeling that you're able to give them by moving air. And I guess there are people who, if they're making it for that idiom, then they want to make sure that the feeling is right and it's going to feel right on a dance floor or on a crazy car stereo, if that's the kind of end format they're making it for. So I guess you can't test that in earbuds.
You can't test that in earbuds, but then, on the other side of the spectrum, and this might be a New York bias thing where we're generally traveling in trains or on foot, where we're listening in headphones, or, I mean, God forbid, but also quite often people just listen right off their phone speaker.
Right.
And then the question becomes, okay, how do I make it loud enough and full enough that it's going to bump in the club, but also when someone is listening on maybe a bass challenge system or whatever, how do we make that fit in both ways? Are we doing separate masters for this? How do we make that work in multiple venues?
Yeah, no, I hear you. Now, you also brought up your assistants and talking to your assistants about, how to handle these sessions. I'd love to get a sense for when you finally figured out it was right to start bringing assistants into the fold, and what tasks it makes sense to assign to an assistant. Because theoretically, you could do every single task on a record yourself, but that's probably not always optimal. Even though you're doing a lot of tasks, you're doing the vocal producing, you're maybe doing the mixing, you've maybe created the original beat, there are certain things that you're going to farm out. When did you start figuring out, I have to farm some stuff out for this to keep on making sense? And what were those tasks? And how can people best select, what tasks they should be farming out?
It really hit me when I wasn't sleeping as much as I needed to be,
Right.
and it's one of those, the age thing starts to creep up on you, and it's like, all right, yeah, 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night is just not enough,
Hmm.
and I just like I can't run on that the same way I used to in my 20s, um, and just certain things where I found myself saying, okay, I'm spending an extra hour per mix setting up the mix, importing the tracks, making sure that they're all labeled properly because not everyone labels their files properly.
Hmm.
I like to have my tracks in a certain order. So I want my drums first. I want those tracks colored green. I want my bass instruments next, and those are brown. And just setting up the session so when it's time for me to mix, I can sit down, press play,
Hmm.
and I'm ready to go. I want all my faders and pans at least to match where the reference mix is, and I always ask for a reference mix so I know when I sit down to mix, I'm starting from roughly the same place that the client has been living with this, because the client might be living with that rough for 6 months, it might be a year. If I start from somewhere completely different,
Hmm.
it's going to be hard for me to get it to a place that they I'm starting with no guidance. So I like to
Hmm.
start from the rough. So, I want my mixes set up like that. I want, everything to the grid. I want my sections labeled with markers and all these little things that are really important to be able to mix efficiently. Over the course, if I'm mixing a full length album, all right, that might be 15 hours worth of work that
Right.
I've now done, and it wasn't even the creative part of that, so that was one of the bigger things. It's like I want to have someone, and I will be glad to teach them, all right, this is how I mix, this is why I set things up this way, and I'll tell you everything that I do, but I want to be able to walk in the room, sit down and press play and be ready to go.
Right.
But teaching them my process also will teach them, okay, well, I like this part of what Willie does, and I don't need to do this, but they can start to develop themselves as their own engineers.
Right.
Just there are certain things where I think you just need to be honest with yourself as an engineer and get over the ego part of, oh, well, who do I think I am that I need an assistant?
Hmm.
I've been there, like, yeah, I do my thing. I could do it all. Do I really need an assistant? Well, I like to go home and eat dinner with my wife. I
Yeah.
like to do other things in the world. And there's just so many hours in the day, and someone else could be better suited to tuning a vocal where I know how to
Right.
do it and I'm pretty good at tuning vocals, but someone else could be doing with that while I'm doing some of the more higher profile, higher pressure things.
Right. And even if you were never wanted to have dinner with your wife ever, and all you ever focused on was business, even from a business perspective, if you could free up 15 hours that you could go out and get new clients with, I mean,
Yeah,
or create beats with, or have a vocal producing session, maybe the kinds of things that someone earlier on in their career wouldn't be as effective at doing, and you can put that back onto your plate. I mean, that's pretty huge. That's a pretty huge win right there.
absolutely. There's certain things where my clients expect me to be the one doing it.
Right.
If someone hires me to mix, like, I'm mixing the track.
Yeah.
If someone hires me to produce a vocal, I'm doing that. But if I'm producing a vocal and I've got an assistant who's prepared for that, might be that day. I was like, all right, you're up. Sit down in front of the door. You're flying the
Hmm.
ship today. I'm just giving the commands, and that's that pressure spot where we've all been as assistants. It's like, okay, now's my time.
Yeah.
And the pressure's on, but it's got to be in a scenario that the client is comfortable with, and that works for everybody. But those pressure situations are what prepare us to do all the things full time later on.
Right, absolutely. And it's also a wonderful thing because it's a way to give other people job experience, start other careers. And I remember I was talking to Ben Allen, I think it was a podcast episode 12. He produced Gnarls Barkley, or actually engineered, I should say, that big Gnarls Barkley record, the one that had Crazy on it. He worked a lot with CeeLo and before that P. Diddy and other folks. And he these days on all of his sessions, he's like, I don't really engineer. And sometimes I will go as far as putting, if I can, hire in an engineer to do the day-to-day stuff so that I can have the kind of bigger picture conversation with the artist and get some distance
Right.
and say, is it going in the right direction? So that's even another layer of separating producer from engineering. But I think the paradigm you're talking about is even more common, where you're kind of the producer engineer, but you have an assistant who at least can take over the controls so you can get a little distance and focus more on coaching the vocalist that you're with, instead of saying, oh, did I create enough tracks yet for the next vocal fly-in we're going to do and all that stuff. Yeah.
Right, exactly. If I'm creating tracks and doing all of that, what I'm also doing is ignoring my artist at that moment.
Right. Yeah.
And when the artist is in the room, they're the most important person in the world. That's
Hmm.
that's that's how I look at it. So, and playing my artists are patient, and I'm quick enough where I can kind of multitask, but I would, if I can monotask, I would rather do that in that sense where I'm just focused on the performance, not, oh, was that overcompressed or was this and that.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'll always have those things in the back of my mind, but it's great if somebody else is working on it while I'm discussing the phrasing of the pre-chorus.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And so for you, it seems like one of the things that you're farming out to assistants is mix session setup, which is something that could take an hour or more, for you to do that you can free up. Maybe they're running the controls potentially during a vocal session. You mentioned things like vocal tuning, or I guess in a paradigm where you're dealing with live performances, maybe some performance editing. Are
Mhm.
those things you're farming out to specific specialists, or is those things that you're going to train the same assistant to do who's doing the mix session setup?
Ideally, I would be training the same assistant to do it. Those are both things that I'm still working on delegating.
Right.
From working by myself for so long, it's like, all right, I know I can sit down and I can tune all these vocals really quick,
Yeah.
and I want it done quick. So either, you know, I want to train my assistant to be able to do these things as quickly as possible. But if something's got to get done, my general kind of thought is, all right, well, let me just do it real quick. And then,
Right.
but again, that's time that could be used better elsewhere, but I'm picky.
Yeah.
And so I need to find that balance of, okay, I need to train someone to do this exactly like I'm hoping or exactly like I'm looking for, or I might as well do it myself. But what I don't want to do is do it twice.
Right. Yeah.
So it's got to be done right the first time. If we had to go back and tweak or whatever, like that's fine, but it's got to be done right the first time because if not, then I feel like I'm wasting time.
Right. It's such a balancing act. I know this in my own business. There's a mantra that I keep on trying to remind myself of, which is ideally you want to be working on your business as much as possible instead of just working in your business. And one of the ways you
Yes.
can be working on your business is having other people who you've trained to take over portions of your business so that you can do more. But it's like in order to do that, you need to take time right now to save time in the long run. And it's a tricky thing.
Yes.
You only want to do it with the right assistant who's going to be around, because to have an assistant engineer save you 15 hours on one project, you might need to spend 2 hours with them, maybe 3 hours teaching them a task. And in that time, you could have prepped 3 tracks, but
Right.
instead you're spending 2 or 3 hours maybe prepping one track just right. So you're losing time right now to save time later. Hopefully all that works out because the assistant that you've chosen is sharp, picks this stuff up, retains this stuff, and is going to keep on coming back. And you're not going to lose them in 3 months. So you don't have to go and waste time now to save time later again with somebody else. So that is the balancing act. You got to find people who are likely to stick around a bit, or maybe can help train your replacement. That would be a good thing. But that is a
Hmm.
tricky thing. There's always that push and pull of, man, if I do this really quick right now, it'll get done. But if I'm always doing it really quick right now, I won't be saving time in the long run. And it's something I got to remind myself of all the time in running Sonic Scoop and so many other things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very true, and it's very difficult. Like I said, it's difficult for me to delegate. But part of that becomes just the comfort level with the assistant. My last assistant, Cedric, I worked with for 4 years.
Right.
And during that time, I tried to help him, further his career. He's a great producer himself, so get him some placements here and there, and he now has a burgeoning career where he's doing his own stuff, and I want to foster that. Ideally, any assistant I have, I want them to outgrow that position.
Right.
If you're a lifelong assistant, all right, well, where's your ambition or where's your talent level? You kind of have to wonder about that. I want someone to come in and, it's that trust level of, okay, I'm gonna let you sit down and hit record and run this session for one of my clients who trust me to come in. If I put you in that seat, that reflects on me as much or even more than it reflects on the assistant, because if something
Mhm.
goes wrong, the client's going to ask me, why did you let that person handle my vocals if they're not capable of doing that? It's
Right.
not even, they're not going to necessarily go directly back to them. I mean, there might be a question in the studio, but the real whole thing actually falls on me because it's my call.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that someone is prepared, but I also wouldn't want someone working under me, and I wouldn't want to mentor someone and then have them not know how to do things correctly because I'm doing them a disservice as well.
Right.
So it's important to me that, yeah, we have the time to learn and to learn the right ways of doing things, or at least the right ways as I see them. There's very many different rights.
There's a right way to do things in your studio.
Yes, and that's very true. And if people are going to book the greenhouse, they kind of expect that.
Yeah.
So, and that's what makes me someone book me instead of the person next door. So I expect all of those standards to be met. I have an intern now, and those responsibilities are different here than for an assistant, but I have a new assistant starting in the summer, and I've decided to take the time to make up an operations manual.
Mm.
So I can just general things like, okay, well, when you come in, this is how I expect certain things. This is where certain things need to be cleaned. This is what you need to clean, or X, Y, and Z, and work through them with that. But also, there's always a reference. They can come back and say, oh, okay, well, where does this mic go? Where does X, Y, and Z go? Oh, it goes here, and it goes here every time because Green wrote it down and he handed me something that said it that way. So it's got to be that way.
Right. Now, did you have the benefit of coming up as an assistant yourself, or did you come into this through some other route?
Kind of a circuitous route. When I graduated Berkeley, I was rather hard-headed, and I decided, well, I'm not going to go and be anyone's runner in anyone's studio. I'm going to make records of my own studio, everything my own way, which, I'm here now, so it worked out to a certain degree, but there are also things that I kind of had to catch up on later on that I might have learned more directly in the, traditional studio system of being a GA and then being an assistant and working your way up through the ranks. But with fewer and fewer large studios like that,
Yeah.
that career trajectory has kind of changed a lot and gone by the wayside a good bit.
Yeah, well, this is why we're kindred spirits, Willie. I was equally hard-headed when I was getting into things, and I bought gear and went directly to bands and recorded them and produced them and mixed them. And it wasn't until I'd been doing this stuff basically as a living for a while that I said, I've never done the assisting in a studio route. It would be cool to get a gig as an assistant. And I did that, I think, 5 years into kind of producing full time. I got an assisting gig at a big, $2,000 a day, huge Manhattan room studio. And I did that for a year just to see what that was like. But man, I must have sent out 100 resumes before I got one job offer at a big studio, because there just aren't that many big studios hiring at any time. But
Yeah.
I think that we kind of came in at this time when there was this alternate path in where you could be a guy with some gear and some ambition and some hustle, and you could start a career for yourself. And obviously that's still possible today. But I think something that's happening more and more right now that wasn't happening then is this paradigm you're talking about of being an assistant for a producer or for a writer in their small studio. And I think that paradigm wasn't around. There was assisting at a big studio and there was going your own way. And I think now there's enough people who've made a career for themselves out of their small project studios that being an assistant for someone at a project studio is an option. And even for some people, the assistant can be remote. I don't know if yours are always there, but I was talking to, I believe it was Ariel Bourgeau in podcast episode, man, I'm going to have to guess. I want to say it was episode 13. And he talks about, I think he was saying his assistant was in another state, a third of the way across the country. And that's possible when they're doing mix setup for you. So I wonder if this is a new paradigm and a new way in for a lot of people. If you can find a producer that you can hook up with or a writer that you can hook up with and assist for, maybe that's a new way in for some people who aren't as hard-headed as us and just think they should go it completely alone.
Right. Yeah. I've actually spoken to Ariel about that exactly. He's a buddy of mine, and I asked him, well, how do you work with your assistant remotely? And it's, very much, well, this is how I expect everything, and it has to be that way every time because there's no person to person. Hey, let me just ask a quick question. It's like, no, this is how it goes, and it needs to be like that. Because I do so much tracking and so many various things. Generally, my assistants are here,
Mm-hmm.
but if it's something like mix setups, it's like, okay, well, you can do that from home. You know, you can, if you download the files and you set it up and everything's secure and it's right, and then you know, Dropbox it over to me, as long as it's right, you don't have to be in the studio to do that. And oftentimes it's helpful because I can be mixing one song and they can be setting up the next song, you know, on a laptop or something. So for mix setups, that can work remotely. But I also feel like for the mentorship type of thing, it helps to be in the room, because what you don't learn remotely or you can't learn online are the client interactions.
Yeah.
And those, I feel like, the most important things to learn as an assistant, as an intern, is just like, what is it like to be in the room with somebody? Because at this point, the way technology works, and it allows small businesses like me or much smaller to be able to have nice quality setups, is that we do a lot of things by ourselves in rooms and then present it to people. But when you have an artist walk in to cut a vocal, that's a different vibe. And if you've never been in the room and seen those kind of interactions, then you don't necessarily know how to act. And there's definitely studio protocol that, you know, needs to be observed. If you're the intern, sorry, no one's looking for your input on the vocal take right now. And you need to know when to maybe say something, which if you're an intern, that's probably not very often at all. Or when it's appropriate to contribute and kind of see those interactions, you know? As much as things are online and digital, we're still creating art with people. And so people interactions and people skills are very important. And I don't think I just, YouTube can teach you a lot, but YouTube can't teach you how to interact with other humans in a professional setting.
Right. Yeah. That's a definitely a good thing. Learning those soft skills is huge. I think as you get higher up in the business, your competency on your craft is kind of assumed. And hopefully you get to a certain level where you're not going to get better, you're just going to get different. You're going to get a different take. You're not going to get a better mix, you're going to get a different mix from somebody else. And hopefully that's the level you get to. And once you're there, those soft skills are huge. And there are some people who never get to show off their technical skills because they haven't developed those soft skills. And there's some people who never get to develop the technical skills because they don't have enough of the soft skills to get into that situation enough. So that is huge. And it's a hard thing to learn other than by being around people. And it's a tricky thing because us people who got into speakers and knobs and microphones and all that, it's not usually because we were the most socially adept people at our school, you know, right? But it's still something we got to learn, you know? So, but it is amazing in high-level sessions how much little things can be appreciated. I remember as an assistant at a big studio, we had someone come in, I believe it was Jimmy Webb, who did that song, like, up, up and away in my beautiful balloon. Like, this big songwriter, he probably has residuals coming out the wazoo. And I remember he came in really for a listening session where he was checking some, I think it was like pre-production of songs he had written. And he was really there just to listen to his record in a studio environment. And I came in and I kind of set him up for his listening session. And then he was starting to listen. And then as he was starting to get into it, I started to dim down the lights very slowly for him. And I put him on a really dim setting. And I kind of just left the room and was just kind of outside and had my eye there to see, you know, through the glass, you know, if he needed anything. And he came out like 40 minutes later. And he gave me $100 tip. He said, that was so, he said, thank you so much. Like, that was perfect. You know, he was like, it was, you could really like, he was, what's the word for it? He was like doing a seance with his music he was working on and just respecting that for him. And that was like a touching moment that I cared to notice the emotional state he was in. And he was like super appreciative when it came out. And stuff like that, small things, really can resonate with people, make a difference in their day and make a difference in their creative process.
I think those are the things that matter the most. You know, first, just showing that you care about their music. We look at music so much as content nowadays, which is kind of a dirty word to me. You know, it's like, it's something, you know, for a commercial or it's background music, whatever, but it's art. And if you show somebody that you care about their art, that's going to automatically mean a lot to them. You know, I feel like at this point, if I walk into a studio, I expect whoever's working there to know how to use the gear and to make things sound good. If I go somewhere to cut a vocal and someone else is engineering, I expect that vocal to sound good.
Right.
Like that, like to me, that goes without saying. But it's all the little things that separate my studio from everywhere else that really make things work. Like I do the Philips Hue lights in here, so all my clients have
Yes.
their own lighting settings. So when they walk in, the studio already looks like what is comfortable for them. Now the studio is not, oh, I'm going to Willie Green's studio. I'm going to my studio. I feel at
Right.
home there. They're automatically going to perform better.
Hmm.
One of the things I learned working at a big studio, I used to manage Legacy, also Right Track Sound on Sound,
Hmm.
was the client requirement book. Each client
Mm.
has different things. Okay, well, they like this certain kind of incense. 50 Cent wants his own vitamin water in the fridge.
Hmm.
These kind of things, and they walk in. They feel at ease. They feel comfortable, and that goes a very long way. So I've got a selection of teas. I don't like all of these teas, but I know clients who love that herbal green tea thing.
Right.
Cool. I will always have it for them, and when they come in, the hot water is already on, or whatever it is. You know, Studio owning and engineering and production, as much as they can be artistic, it's the service industry.
Yeah.
It's the same way you wouldn't walk into a restaurant and set the table yourself. You walk in, you sit down, you expect it to be all ready. When a client walks in my studio for a vocal session, the mic is up, ready, good levels, the headphones are tested, ready to go. They should be able to walk right in the front door into the booth and I can hit record. That's the way that I start every session. We may chat for an hour if that's the mood that they're in, but at
Hmm.
least be prepared for that, because when they walk in the studio, the artist should always be the most important person in that room.
Yeah, I love it. I'm with you 110%. I would say that at least 50% of running a successful studio is beverages and lighting. And I'm not,
Yeah,
I'm not saying this facetiously
it's
either.
really true.
I mean, you got to have like the environment has to be right. And then, at Joe Lambert Mastering, we had one of those, Keurig espresso and coffee makers. But it's not just having the
Mhm.
Keurig, it's having the complete selection of, well, we have espresso and we have latte and we have the Colombian and we have the dark roast. And then we have the herbal tea one you could put in there. And that's huge. And people are really appreciative of that. It's like you said, going to a restaurant. You will remember if the food was phenomenal, you're going to say the food was phenomenal. Just like if you go to a studio and the sound was phenomenal, you're going to say the sound was phenomenal. But the little things that you'll remember will be like the type of candle holder they had on the table or the type of
Right.
faucet they had in the bathroom. You're like, that said something about that restaurant. So I'm going back,
Mhm.
And those little touches can be really big for a studio and they don't necessarily have to be crazy expensive. I love your idea about the Philips Hue lighting system. And for those of you where this just went over them, you essentially have these light bulbs that have like a little microchip in them so you can control them for your phone. And you're saying
Right.
you have
Yeah, they're Wi-Fi
preset
lights.
lighting presets for each of your clients. So
Mhm.
a Lucid's coming in the studio, you bring up the Lucid preset and maybe the lights are purple or green or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's just brilliant. So I had to
It's
repeat it. That's how good it was, Willie.
Yeah, it's super cool, and I mean, if you look on, like, they're expensive for light bulbs,
Yes.
but for the reaction that you get, and I've got multiple settings myself. I have,
Hmm.
when I first come in, my bright settings, so I make sure everything's clean, but I have a green mix setting. I have a
Mm.
production setting that might be different, just,
Yeah.
so I can get my own vibe. I mean, the studio is about the vibe. Creation is about the vibe. And, also having that level of detail for your clients, they're going to trust your work that much more. They know, okay,
Right.
well, he's meticulous about this. He's always got the right incense for me. Oh, I don't need to stress about the mix because I know he is focused on every little aspect. So, of course, he's going
Right.
to get that
He's
right.
going to bring that to the audio because that's what he brings to the rest of his life. I like it. It is a
Right.
signaling mechanism, and you can't fake it. You can't fake taking that level of care and these other things and not take it in your main craft. Like I don't think you could fake that. So
Right.
very cool. And also a good thing about compartmentalizing. We started this podcast out talking about all the different roles and how so often they run together. But having something like that that's going to help you compartmentalize slightly and say, we're in mixing mode now. I know because we're mixing lights are on, and like
Exactly.
you get into that mode, then maybe that, oh, should we go back and check out the other vocal takes one more time? Maybe that will get pushed back further and happened a little less frequently when like we're in that mode and we know what that mode's like. So
Right.
really good,
Right.
interesting stuff. One of the things I wanted to say earlier on was it is amazing how many different roles and how many different mini jobs go into the job of putting out a record. I mean, there is the creation, obviously, of the lyrics. There's a creation of the beat. There's producing and coaching the artist. There's all of the engineering stuff. And under the engineering stuff, oh my goodness, there's so many things, from tuning a vocal to gain staging and so many others. And one of the things that I often think about that really helped crystallize it for me is stopping thinking about in the music paradigm for a while and learning more about film sound and working a little in film sound and even teaching a class in sound for picture. I had to give a lecture for a sound for picture class about all the roles that go into making a Hollywood motion picture and all the audio roles that go in there. And oh my goodness, if you're in a big budget motion picture, there is a dialogue recordist, like an ADR recordist. There's an ADR editor, right? There's like a multiple sound people on set. Then there's someone who's creating sound effects, and there's a sound effects editor. Then there's the person who does the music selection, and then there's the music editor who's actually putting them in. And then in the end, you have like 3 different mixers: one for dialogue, one for sound effects, and one for music. And those 3 mixers could be working in tandem. And then you have a supervising sound editor over all of them. And then maybe you have runners who are helping those departments work with each other. They're getting the stuff from the voiceover recordist to the voiceover editor. And it's like, whoa, I don't even know how many jobs I just threw out there. Is it 18? I'd have to go back and count them. But on a smaller production, all of those jobs still get done, but it's by one person,
Right.
Maybe it's by
Right.
2 people. And in a way, that same kind of paradigm is going on in music production. And ultimately, if you can find a few of those things where you can offload them, that's probably huge. And if you can find a few of those things where maybe you can compartmentalize them a little more, but without, sacrificing the reality that this is art and things are going to flow together, and you can find that balance, and you could be a lot more productive and make a lot more work. So it's something we got to think about all the time in our own process. So
Absolutely.
thanks for having this conversation with me. It was really great to have you on the podcast, Paul Willie Green Womack.
Yes, I'm so glad to have it. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Now, before I let you go, I want to ask 2 major questions that we have to ask of all producer engineering people. Number 1, I see some gear back there. I see some nice analog gear as well as all the digital stuff. Is there one piece of analog hardware you couldn't do without and you're really glad to have? And is there one at least piece of software that you couldn't do without and you're really glad is part of your workflow?
Ooh, yeah. I'm a bit of a creature of habit. Every mix I do, everything I do, I try to always do at least one thing different just to keep things fresh. But there are things that, are definite go-tos for me. On the hardware side, I would say, apart from the obvious things like monitors, which I'm not switching out every day, I'm obviously using the same thing. But I'm a big fan, as Sonic Scoop readers will know, of DIY recording equipment.
Yeah.
I love their stuff. It's interesting, it's flexible, and so many different things you can do with it. So I would say any mix that I do has probably got a DIY recording equipment, a color palette somewhere on there. I mix with a lot of saturation. I love, I make pretty left field hip hop, a lot of my stuff, and a lot of it's distorted and grimy and all that, but in the best ways. In the color palettes, you can switch in different flavors of distortion or whatever you want for that day. So anything I do has probably got that on there somewhere. And software wise, I would say Cubase is the main thing, that's my DAW of choice. And particularly because of what we've been talking about, all the different hats that we wear, I love it for mixing, but it's great for tracking. It's great for composition. The MIDI in there is very powerful, so it lets me do all the different things. But outside of the main platform I use, I think definitely Sound Toys. When I need... If I need something, if I got to make something sound cool, first thing I reach for is the effects track, and start piecing different things together. I love the Sound Toys bundle. There's always it's always got the right thing in there somewhere.
Yeah, I hear you. And then my last question for you before we let you go for the day is, for people who want to be in your position down the road, for folks who are kind of starting out, maybe they're in a bedroom studio, maybe they have aspirations to produce or engineer, and they're not quite in it full time yet as a real career, what is some of the advice you give to anyone in that position who is pretty serious, pretty ambitious, wants to be doing this? What bit of advice would you give to people kind of new to the field, career-wise?
Wherever you are, and I'm lucky I'm in New York and there's a very thriving scene here, but get out, go to shows, meet like-minded people, meet them in person.
Mm-hmm.
Twitter's great, and I've got friends I've never met in real life. I only know
Yeah.
from Twitter, and that's fine. But a personal connection is always going to leave a much more lasting impression.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to get into a scene, if you want to make hip hop in Des Moines, there's a hip hop scene in Des Moines.
Right.
Go to shows, meet people there, see who you're aspiring to work with, and get to know them. But see people who are on your same level and begin. That's how you can kind of start to develop your chops by working with people who are also in the same position. You can't just jump in and all of a sudden, okay, I'm brand new, I got Pro Tools. Where's Kanye? That's not how it works. You need to develop yourself, but you will also develop a roster of artists that will push you to be better. You'll push them, and then have people that you build your career around. The first thing I did when I moved to New York City is I reached out to the label I now work with, Backwood Studios, and I said, hey, I'm a really big Billy Woods fan. I'd love to work with Billy Woods. And eventually I met him, and we've been making records together for 10 years now.
Right.
But that's because we got together, we sat down in the studio, and we started working on things. But we became friends,
Mm-hmm.
like Woods was in my wedding. Like, we're that close,
Yeah.
people who are not just my artists, but also my friends. We have lifelong connections, and I'll make records with them for a long time because we have that. That's what scenes and communities are about, not just for someone to put you on as a springboard elsewhere, but these are the people you're going to be working with day in and day out throughout your career.
Right. Right. Beautiful. Makes a lot of sense. Now, where can the people find out more about you? If they want to get connected with you, where are the best places to go? Where can they find you on the Twitters? What's your website? Where should people hook up with you?
Reach out to me. The website is best. I've got a contact form on there, and I've got my discography and all that stuff. So that's williegreenmusic.com.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on Twitter, Willie Green 1. That's WILLIE Green 1. I might often be talking more about sneakers or basketball, as I'm a pretty big sneaker collector.
All right.
Because I'm a regular person. I'm not, there's more to me than just EQs and compressors, but I love that stuff too, and we'll chat about that too. And then I'm on Instagram. My personal page is Willie Green 1, the number 1, just like my Twitter. But also the studio has its own account where we, focus on gear and the artists that we work with, and that's GH Recording BK on Instagram and on Twitter. And that's where I do more audio focused stuff because no one's following my studio to talk about, the NBA playoffs.
Gotcha.
So, any of these things, but I'm a widespread person. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's one thing is meeting people and developing relationships is we're all real people.
Mm-hmm.
We're normal people. It's not just audio only, connect with people on a real level as a real human being, and that's going to last a lot longer too. So reach out to me, say hello, and whatever. We can talk about anything that's going on. We can talk about the new Jordans that are coming out or whatever's happening. But I'm a regular person, and so, you can approach me that way too.
Good stuff. All right. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Got to give one last big shout out to the sponsors. Paul, Willie Green, Womack mentioned him. Sound Toys. Sound Toys sponsoring this once again. If you do not have the Sound Toys bundle, if you have not experienced the magic that is the effects rack, check them out, soundtoys.com. You can check out anything they make for free at soundtoys.com. Big thanks to Novation. This mysterious logo here is the Novation logo. Novation making very excellent MIDI controllers, synths, pad controllers, really cost-effective stuff, really great build quality. And then, last certainly not least, another great podcast. If you want more great conversations about music and audio production, check out Gear Club. Check them out at gear-club.net. That is gear-club.net. Hosted by Stu Lerman and John Agnello, two excellent producer engineers who have worked with Sharon Van Etten, Dinosaur Jr., St. Vincent, a whole bunch of great stuff. So check those guys out too. Paul, Willie Green, Womack at the Greenhouse Studios. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. See you next time.